rank somewhat around the Philippines or above. Now the question is, what are the fundamental elements that will or will not revolutionize the country and will or will not change the status quo? And there are three basic building blocks. The first is cognitive skills. The cognitive skills are knowledge is really develops out of language and numbers. And these are the two great inventions of mankind, and they're the cornerstones of all learning. These are the great, in other words, the human mind had to communicate, and it created a system that he didn't find in nature, and that is how to speak to each other, how to record what is spoken, how to transmit it. With numbers, what is a number? It's a total abstraction. It doesn't exist in nature, but it's something that the human mind can associate with concrete things, and in that way organize the world. The acquisition of language and numbers starts shortly after birth. Now the cognitive skills, there are two areas of achievement. One is content, and the other is cognitive skills. Content is pure content. That's naming things. That's naming the name for this, the name for that. And of course, as a child grows up, that child is actually acquiring names of things during his early years at a surprising rate. And you can actually chart the acquisition of names. Cognitive skills relate to attention, concentration, memory, self-discipline, and symbolic and logical thinking. The bottom line for cognitive skills is that if the basic cognitive skills are not acquired by the 5th grade, they are not likely to be acquired thereafter. If they're not acquired by the 5th grade, they're not likely to be acquired thereafter. Now they may be acquired, but only with a great deal of effort. It becomes increasingly hard to get what you should learn from birth to the 3rd grade, to the 3rd year of life, from the 3rd year of life to the year in which you reach the 5th grade. The second thing I want to talk about of these building blocks is culture, and this is the most sensitive thing that one can talk about when one is addressing the problems of any specific country. In our study, we actually used 3 different definitions of culture, but the one I want to use tonight is this one. It's by Malcolm Gladwell. It comes out of Malcolm Gladwell's most recent book, Outliers: The Story of Success. He contends that cultural legacies are powerful and pervasive and persist long after their original usefulness has passed. If we are honest about where they came from and are willing to confront them, we can change. Now, Gladwell's whole approach to the world is analyzing human behavior. And for this particular point, his main bit of evidence is, interestingly, the Korean airline disasters. Strange, but let me continue to show you why that is so. Between 1980 and the year 2000, Korean Air had 11 crashes in 20 years. That included 1 Boeing 707, 5 Boeing 747s, 2 McDonnell Douglas Jumbos, an Airbus, and the loss of 1,048 lives. The accident rate for Korean Air was 17 times greater than for United Airlines. Korean Air was a partner in a consortium with Delta Airlines, Air France, and Korean Air, was a marketing consortium. This crash rate resulted in the Korean Airlines being dropped from that consortium. This level of incidences of fatalities caused the U.S. government to ban travel by any government employee on Korean Air even though the U.S. government, the United States, has a full division of infantry sitting on the DMZ, and it has had such a division sitting there since the Korean War. Now you ask the question, what's the problem? The problem is the culture in the cockpit. The culture in the cockpit. That was the villain. Now what do you mean by that? Well, on a 707 you have a captain and a co-pilot. In Korean culture, there is such a respect for authority, that a co-pilot, for instance, if he saw, in this particular case, the captain entered the wrong coordinates into the navigation system, they don't step up and say, "Captain, you made a mistake, you should have done this." They won't do that. The culture, out of respect, you don't cross a superior in that way. In this particular instance, the 707 wandered over a Russian territory, and a hotshot Russian pilot shot it down. Now, each of the crashes have similar stories. So what was the solution? The solution was you had to take all your pilots and you had to give them a very, very intense training, so that when they sat in that airplane, the culture in the cockpit was one where if the captain was making a mistake, he was corrected right then and there. If there was a mistake, you didn't remain silent. This represented a significant cultural change for Koreans. It also means that in an emergency, a co-pilot will take over, will literally physically grab the yoke of the airplane and take control from the captain. And you have to have a level of trust and communication between the people in the cockpit, that if that happens, the captain will quickly appraise the situation and will accede to the actions taken by the co-pilot if they're the correct actions. You don't stand on whether I made the right decision or made the wrong decision, because a 747 that was traveling from Tokyo to Guam, such a situation occurred, and it ended up running into a mountain over there, and you had such an intense fire in such an inaccessible area that the fire burned for 8 hours before anybody could get to the wreckage. Everybody died in it. Now, the culture in the cockpit is applicable to the culture in the classroom. It is vital. Culture is the biggest stumbling block, the biggest pothole that a country has to face when it comes to such things as what we're talking about tonight. Culture is to academic achievement what location is to real estate. Now, in the United States, there's been a lot of work done on culture. I am not going to talk about Bahamian culture. Bahamian culture should be addressed with regard to education, and should be addressed by Bahamians, by Bahamian sociologists, Bahamian anthropologists, by journalists. But in the United States, this study has been discussed in great depth, and in this study, this essay, I review 3 important African-American scholars on this subject. The long and short of it is, in the United States, if you look at Asian Americans and you look at Euro-Americans with regard to their test scores, the difference between Asian Americans and Euro-Americans is exactly, more or less, exactly the same